Eliana rose from the bed on trembling legs. She gathered the silk sheets around herself and moved toward the bathroom. As she stepped inside, she paused, glancing back at Alex's tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. A swirl of emotions churned in her chest. Fear, exhaustion, and a tiny spark of something she couldn't name. Just 1 week, she reminded herself as she closed the bathroom door softly behind her. I can survive 1 week. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, spilling golden light across the bed, but Alex was already gone. Eliana stirred slowly, feeling the empty space beside her. She reached out instinctively, fingertips brushing cool sheets where his warmth used to be. A hollow ache settled in her chest as she sat up and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Meanwhile, across the city, Alex sat behind his sleek mahogany desk, crisp in a tailored navy suit. Papers were neatly stacked beside his laptop, a fresh espresso steaming at his elbow. But instead of studying contracts, Alex leaned back in his chair, his mind elsewhere. He shook his head slightly, a faint grin playing at the corners of his mouth. Who still uses those phones at this day and age? He murmured under his breath, recalling the battered, outdated phone he'd glimpsed in Eliana's purse the night before. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own state-of-the-art smartphone. With a few taps, he called Kiera. "Hello, Alex," Kiera answered, her voice bright and professional. "Get me the latest phone model from the store," Alex said briskly. "And send it to Eliana now." "Yes, sir," she replied without missing a beat. Alex chuckled softly as he ended the call. He tossed his phone onto the desk and leaned back, an amused glint in his dark eyes. "At least she'll look like she belongs in my world," he thought. He picked up his coffee and took a slow sip, his thoughts still lingering on Eliana and the way she'd looked beneath him the night before. Later that morning, Eliana was sitting quietly on the edge of the massive bed, still wrapped in a soft silk robe. She couldn't stop glancing around the penthouse, feeling like an intruder in a world of polished marble, priceless art, and silent luxury. She'd barely touched the breakfast that a silent housekeeper had brought up on a silver tray. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of exhaustion, guilt, and worry for Malia. She was about to rise and look for her clothes when a gentle knock came at the bedroom door. A staff member stepped inside, carrying a small, elegantly wrapped box in glossy black paper tied with a silver ribbon. "Miss Dawson, this is for you," the woman said politely, placing the box on the bed before disappearing as quickly as she'd come. Eliana stared at it wearily for a moment before carefully untying the ribbon. Inside lay a sleek, brand-new smartphone nestled in black velvet. Its screen gleamed like a pool of dark glass. Beneath it sat a tiny note in precise masculine handwriting. "Welcome to the 21st century, Alex." Eliana let out a shaky laugh, the sound half disbelieving. She lifted the phone gingerly, feeling the weight of it in her palm. Compared to her old phone with its cracked screen and worn-out case, this new device looked like something out of a futuristic movie. A flicker of warmth touched her chest. He noticed, she thought, then immediately shoved the feeling away. This doesn't mean anything. It's part of the deal. She set the phone on the nightstand and drew a long breath, steeling herself for whatever the day might bring. Meanwhile, back in his office, Alex was flipping through reports when his own phone buzzed with a text notification. "Delivery confirmed, she has the phone." Alex smirked faintly and set his device down, his mind already drifting to what the next night might hold. Eliana lingered a few more minutes on the edge of the bed, staring at the gleaming new phone. Finally, she sighed and pushed herself to her feet. The moment she stood, a sharp pain shot through her lower body, making her gasp and clutch the edge of the nightstand for balance. Not just pain, an ache that seemed to radiate through her entire body, reminding her of everything that had happened the night before. As she took a careful step, a soft groan escaped her lips. Every movement sent small spikes of soreness through her muscles. "Alex, you have wrecked me," she whispered under her breath, her face flushing with a mix of embarrassment and reluctant amusement. She made her way slowly to the bathroom. Under the steamy spray of the shower, Eliana closed her eyes, letting the hot water cascade over her tender skin. She winced when it touched certain bruised spots along her hips and thighs, each one a mark of Alex's powerful possession. Her mind was a jumble of emotions, humiliation, exhaustion, but also a strange, confusing spark that she tried desperately to ignore. Focus on Malia, she told herself fiercely. This is all for her. After dressing in simple clothes, a soft blouse and stretchy leggings that felt mercifully forgiving, Eliana grabbed her purse and slipped out of the penthouse. She made her way down through the towering building, avoiding eye contact with the staff who opened doors and called elevators with polite efficiency. Outside, the city buzzed as usual, the noise somehow comforting in its familiarity. She flagged down a taxi and gave the driver the hospital's address. As the car sped through traffic, Eliana stared out the window, trying to push away memories of Alex's touch, his dark eyes, and the heat of his body pressing into hers. But the ache lingering in her muscles made forgetting impossible. 1 week, she reminded herself. Just 1 week. Soon, she was standing in the bright corridors of the hospital, the familiar antiseptic scent wrapping around her like an old, unwelcome friend. She took a deep breath and stepped into Malia's room, her heart squeezing as her daughter's eyes lit up. "Mommy!" Malia cried, reaching out her small arms. Eliana crossed the room and gently hugged her daughter, ignoring the sharp twinge in her hips. "How's my baby doing today?" she asked, forcing brightness into her voice. Malia giggled, clutching her stuffed bunny tight. "I got a new sticker." Eliana smiled, blinking back tears. In that moment, every bruise, every ache felt worth it. By late afternoon, Eliana returned to the penthouse, her steps slow and cautious as she entered the private elevator. The doors slid open directly into the massive living space, where soft music played from hidden speakers. Alex was there, standing by the windows in yet another impeccable suit, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He turned as she entered, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe. "You went to the hospital." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Eliana said quietly. "I wanted to see my daughter." Alex studied her for a long moment, then took a slow sip of his drink. "You didn't ask permission." Eliana stiffened, her pulse skipping. "You said I could go anywhere. You just said no work." A faint smirk tugged at Alex's lips. "True, I did say that." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "How is she?" he asked suddenly, his tone softer than she expected. Eliana blinked, caught off guard. "She's okay today. She was happy to see me." Alex nodded once. "Good." He reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair from her face. "Come sit." He guided her to the plush sofa and poured her a glass of water, his fingers brushing hers as he handed it over. For a few moments, they sat in silence, the city glowing outside the tall windows. Then Alex leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Tonight," he said, voice dropping lower. "You're mine again." Eliana felt a shiver run through her, fear and something darker twisting inside her chest. "I know," she whispered. Alex tilted his head, studying her as though searching for secrets beneath her skin. "I like that you're honest," he said finally. "But I also like that you obey." He stood, extending his hand once more. "Let's continue where we left off." Eliana hesitated for a heartbeat. Then she placed her trembling hand in his, letting him draw her to her feet. Alex studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes scanning every inch of her face. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "How much can you handle?" Eliana blinked, confusion flickering across her features. "What do you mean? Aren't you sore down there?" he said bluntly, looking directly at her. She stiffened, her cheeks burning hot. "I am, but I agreed to do this. So, I can't just refuse outright," she whispered, her voice trembling. Alex's gaze softened slightly, though his expression remained unreadable. "Lay down," he said. Eliana obeyed, moving carefully as she lay back against the cool sheets. She parted her legs slightly, opening herself despite the ache still lingering in her body. Alex's hands slid between her thighs, fingers skilled and sure as they found the trigger spot deep inside her heat. A sharp gasp tore from Eliana's throat as pleasure surged through her, her hips shifting instinctively toward his touch. Alex lay beside her, propped on one elbow, his eyes locked on hers as he continued his slow, deliberate caresses. "You're too sore," he said, his voice husky but calm. Eliana shivered, her body humming with a need that defied the pain. "But even at that, you make me want you, Alex," she whispered, breathless. Alex's eyes darkened, a spark of triumph flashing in them. Then, just as her body tightened with desperate anticipation, he abruptly stopped, pulling his hand away. "How long had it been?" he asked quietly. 5 years, she answered, her voice barely more than a whisper. Alex nodded slowly, considering her words. His eyes lingered on her flushed cheeks and parted lips as though weighing an invisible decision. Finally, he spoke, his tone unexpectedly gentle. "Not tonight," he said. Eliana blinked, shocked, her breath still coming in soft gasps. "What?" Alex leaned closer, brushing a tender kiss against her temple. "Rest. Heal. Tomorrow is another day." He rose from the bed and disappeared into the shadows of the penthouse, leaving Eliana lying there, trembling with a tangled swirl of relief, confusion, and an ache that was no longer just physical. That night, Alex returned to the bedroom after some time, his expression unreadable. He didn't touch her again. Instead, he slipped beneath the covers beside her, lying on his back and staring at the ceiling while the glow of the city lights spilled across the room in shifting patterns. Eliana lay still, the warmth of his body close enough to feel, but not close enough to touch. No intimacy passed between them, just silence and the rhythmic rise and fall of their breathing. Two people sharing a bed, but worlds apart. Eventually, exhaustion pulled Eliana into uneasy sleep. Though even in her dreams, she felt Alex's presence beside her like a heavy shadow. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight pouring through the massive windows of the penthouse. Eliana awoke slowly, blinking against the pale glow filling the room. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the distant hum of the city below. When she turned, she saw that Alex was already up and gone. A folded note lay on the nightstand in his precise handwriting. "Eat breakfast. Be ready. We have things to discuss, Alex." Eliana sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her body still ached, though the sharpest pains had eased to a deep, lingering soreness. She showered quickly, then dressed in a soft cream blouse and comfortable slacks. When she entered the main living area, she found a full breakfast spread waiting on the dining table: eggs, fresh fruit, pastries, and a steaming pot of coffee. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but her nerves twisted tighter with every passing minute. Shortly before 9 o'clock, she heard the quiet chime of the private elevator. Alex stepped out, dressed immaculately in another tailored suit, his dark hair swept neatly back. He looked powerful, controlled, and as distant as ever. He paused when he saw her standing beside the table. His eyes swept over her, lingering for a heartbeat before he spoke. "Good, you're up." Eliana swallowed. "You wanted to talk?" Alex nodded, moving closer, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Yes, we have arrangements to finalize. And there's something else you should know," Alex said, his deep voice smooth but edged with authority. Eliana felt her pulse spike as she clasped her hands together, waiting. Alex gestured for her to sit. He took the chair across from her at the dining table, steepling his fingers as he studied her face. "First," he began, "your check cleared this morning. The funds are in your account." Relief exploded in Eliana's chest, so sudden it nearly stole her breath. She let out a shaky laugh, pressing her fingers to her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "Thank you so much." Alex inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her gratitude without emotion. "Now," he continued, "I'll have my legal team coordinate payment directly with the hospital for your daughter's transplant. There will be no delay in the process. I've already instructed my people to handle the paperwork." Eliana's eyes widened. You did that already." "I don't waste time, Eliana," Alex said flatly. She blinked rapidly, the magnitude of what he was doing sinking in. Alex leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharpening. "But there's something else you should understand." He paused, his silence stretching between them like a taut wire. "Everything that happens between us is private. I meant what I said about the non-disclosure. If you speak about this arrangement to anyone, the consequences will be severe." Eliana swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "I won't tell anyone. I promise." Alex nodded once, then his tone shifted, softening a fraction. "And Eliana?" She looked up, startled by the way he spoke her name. "I don't want you thinking this is charity," he said. "You agreed to a deal. I'm fulfilling my part. You'll fulfill yours. That's how I operate." Eliana nodded, her voice trembling. "I understand." Alex tilted his head slightly. "Do you regret your decision?" A long silence followed as Eliana struggled for words. Finally, she shook her head slowly. "No, not if it means saving my daughter." Alex held her gaze, his eyes unreadable. "Good," he said quietly. He stood and adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket. "Eat your breakfast. We'll be leaving shortly." "Where? Where are we going?" Eliana asked cautiously. Alex paused, a faint smirk touching his lips. "To the hospital," he said. Later that day, Alex and Eliana stood side by side in the bright, sterile corridors of the hospital. The faint scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, and the rhythmic beeping of machines echoed softly from nearby rooms. Across from them stood Dr. Ellis, a kind-eyed man in his early 50s, wearing a crisp white coat and a stethoscope slung around his neck. He held a clipboard close to his chest as he spoke. "So, when can the surgery commence?" Alex asked, his deep voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Dr. Ellis glanced between them, his expression cautious but hopeful. "We'll prep her today," he said. "The surgery will be done tomorrow." "Good," Alex said with a single decisive nod. While the men spoke, Eliana slipped into Malia's hospital room. She moved quietly to the bedside where Malia lay propped up on soft pillows, clutching her stuffed bunny. The little girl's big brown eyes lit up as soon as she saw her mother. "Mommy," she chirped. Eliana bent to kiss her forehead. "Hey, my sweet girl." Malia's gaze shifted past Eliana's shoulder toward the doorway where Alex still stood, speaking quietly with the doctor. "Who is that man, Mommy?" Malia asked curiously, her voice soft and serious all at once. Alex heard the question, though he didn't turn around. He simply paused in mid-sentence and listened, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. "He's my friend," Eliana said gently, smoothing a hand over Malia's hair. "And he's helping us." Malia blinked, considering this carefully. "Is he nice?" Eliana hesitated only a moment. Yes, baby, he's nice. Alex's shoulders relaxed ever so slightly as he continued speaking with Dr. Ellis. Without another word, Alex pulled his sleek black credit card from the inside pocket of his suit jacket and handed it to the doctor. Take what is needed for the surgery, he said firmly. Dr. Ellis blinked, momentarily taken aback. Mr. Peterson, this is a significant sum. Alex cut him off with a dismissive wave of his hand. Just make sure she gets what she needs. Spare no expense. The doctor nodded, gripping the card. Understood, sir. Eliana glanced up from Malia and caught Alex's eyes for a fleeting second. Gratitude and confusion battled across her face. Alex looked back at her, his expression cool, but his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. Hello, Malia said, looking straight at Alex with her big brown eyes full of curiosity and boldness. Alex stood frozen just inside the hospital room, towering in his immaculate suit, as if unsure how to navigate this unexpected conversation with a child. Slowly, almost awkwardly, he stepped closer. Hi, he said stiffly, his voice deeper than usual, the usual confidence in his tone replaced with careful caution. Malia tilted her head, studying him. I'm Malia, but I'm assuming you already know that, she said matter-of-factly. Alex's lips twitched and a small smile, genuine and unexpected, broke across his face. Well, I'm Alex, he said, dipping his chin in a subtle nod. It's nice to meet you. Malia blinked at him, then leaned forward a bit, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Mommy said you're nice. Is that true? Eliana, who had been standing beside the bed watching in stunned silence, quickly covered her mouth with one hand, eyes wide. Malia? Eliana hissed, a flush rising in her cheeks. But Alex held up a hand gently, stopping her. It's fine, he said softly, his eyes still fixed on Malia. Then he tilted his head, considering the little girl's question. I don't know. What does being nice entail? Malia pursed her lips, tapping a tiny finger against her chin as though weighing a very serious matter. It means you share your things, she declared finally. And you say please and thank you, and you help people. Alex nodded slowly, absorbing each rule as if they were the terms of a business contract. Well, I suppose by those rules I am nice, he said with a faint, almost shy smile. Malia grinned and held out her small hand. Nice to meet you, Alex. Alex glanced at her tiny fingers, then wrapped his much larger hand gently around hers, giving it a careful shake. Nice to meet you, too, Malia. Eliana watched the exchange, emotions swelling in her chest until she could hardly breathe. In that quiet moment, Alex Peterson, billionaire playboy, a man who claimed to hate love, looked almost human. Before they left the hospital, Malia's eyelids grew heavy. Her small body sank deeper into the bed as sleep gently pulled her under. Eliana sat at her bedside, stroking her daughter's curly hair. She leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to Malia's forehead, whispering, Mommy loves you, baby. Alex stood nearby, silent and watchful. He kept his hands in his pockets, his expression guarded, but his eyes never left Eliana and Malia. A few minutes later, they slipped quietly out of the hospital room. As they walked down the long corridor, Alex reached out and placed his hand lightly against the small of Eliana's back, a protective gesture so subtle she almost didn't notice it. Soon after, they returned to the penthouse. The elevator doors glided open, revealing the spacious, gleaming living area bathed in afternoon sunlight. Without a word, Eliana drifted into the living room, her mind weighed down with exhaustion and worry for the day ahead. She sank onto the plush sofa, staring blankly at the skyline through the glass walls. Alex paused beside her for a moment, as if considering whether to say something. Then he turned and headed down the hallway to his study, the soft click of the door closing echoing faintly behind him. Alex sat alone in his study, the room dim and hushed, the scent of polished wood and faint traces of his cologne lingering in the air. He rested his elbows on the desk, steepling his fingers beneath his chin as he stared at the sleek surface. For a long while he sat there in silence, as though weighing the events of the day. Malia's candid questions, Eliana's quiet courage, the sight of a child who might not have a future without him. Finally, he pulled open a drawer in his desk and reached inside. His fingers closed around the cool edge of a frame, and he lifted it gently into the light. It was an old photograph, the colors slightly faded with time. In the picture, a woman with warm brown skin and a radiant smile held a little boy in her arms. Her eyes sparkled with joy as she kissed his cheek. The boy was Alex, just 4 years old. A grin stretched across his small face, full of innocence and love. Alex traced the image with his thumb, his jaw tightening as memories he rarely allowed himself to feel threatened to rise. "Mom," he murmured under his breath, his voice so soft it barely reached his own ears. Outside the study doors, the city glittered as dusk fell, unaware of the man who sat alone inside, caught between the past and a future he wasn't sure he wanted. That night, long after the lights of the city had twinkled on, Alex stepped out of his study. He found Eliana sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the skyline. He paused in the doorway for a moment, his dark eyes lingering on her, something unreadable flickering across his expression. Then he crossed the room and reached for her hand. When he pulled her gently into his arms, there was something different in his touch. Gone was the hard, possessive edge that had defined their earlier nights. Instead, he held her carefully, as though afraid she might break. He kissed her slowly, deeply, his lips lingering against hers. And when he lowered her to the bed, he wasn't rough. He made love to her tenderly, burying himself deep inside her with long, deliberate movements that sent waves of heat rolling through her entire body. Eliana's breath came in soft, trembling gasps as her legs wrapped around his waist, instinctively pulling him deeper. Each thrust was a gentle claim, his hands caressing her sides, his mouth trailing soft kisses across her jaw and down her neck. It felt different, intimate, almost reverent. He made love to her like he loved her. Afterward, Alex lay beside her, their bodies still entwined, his chest rising and falling slowly as he caught his breath. He brushed his thumb across her cheek, studying her face in the low light. "You're a good mother," he said quietly, his voice low and sincere. Eliana blinked, stunned by the unexpected softness in his tone. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, she simply stared at him, her heart thudding in her chest, caught between disbelief and a fragile spark of hope. Eliana blinked again, searching his eyes. "You're a good mother," Alex repeated, his thumb still lightly brushing her cheek. She swallowed hard, her voice a whisper. "You don't know that." Alex shook his head slowly. "I do. I've been watching you. The way you look at her. The way you keep going even when you're exhausted. That's strength, Eliana. That's love." Her eyes filled with sudden tears, blurring the sharp planes of his face. "I'm just trying to keep her alive. And that makes you a good mother," Alex said firmly. Eliana let out a shaky breath, her chest tightening. "Why are you being like this?" she asked softly. "This gentle." Alex fell silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting toward the window where city lights shimmered in endless patterns. "Because," he said finally, "I've been with a lot of women, but none of them have ever been like you." She blinked, confused. "Like me? How?" Alex's jaw tightened. "You're not trying to take anything from me. You're not pretending to love me so you can dig your claws into my bank account. You're real. Eliana stared at him, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Alex, I didn't want this, any of this. I just wanted to save my baby. I know, he said quietly. And that's why I'm not going to hurt you. She frowned, trying to understand. But you already have. Alex's breath caught slightly, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He brushed her hair back gently. Maybe, but I'm trying not to. He exhaled and lay back on the pillow beside her, staring at the ceiling. I used to think love was weakness, he murmured. But tonight with you, it didn't feel weak. Eliana's lips parted, her heart pounding in her chest. Alex, she began, but he shook his head as if closing a door inside himself. Don't, he said softly. Don't say anything. Let's just sleep. And so they lay there side by side, the silence between them heavy with things neither dared to say out loud. Outside the city pulsed with life, but in that quiet room, time seemed to hold its breath. The following morning came with a pale gray dawn that crept slowly across the skyline. Eliana awoke to find Alex already dressed, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows with his phone pressed to his ear. His back was to her, his tall silhouette outlined against the first soft glow of daylight. He spoke in low, decisive tones she couldn't quite make out. And even now, after everything, she felt a tremor of awe at how easily he seemed to control the world around him. When he ended the call, he turned and met her eyes. Get dressed, he said quietly. I'll have the car brought around. Eliana nodded and rose from the bed, her heart beating so hard it hurt. Today, her little girl had a chance to live. 30 minutes later, they walked side by side down the hospital corridor. Nurses passed them with polite nods, and a low hush of anxious families filled the air. Eliana tried to steady her hands, but they wouldn't stop trembling. She clutched Malia's stuffed bunny against her chest like a shield. At last, they reached Malia's room. Inside, her daughter sat propped up against her pillows, her hair pulled back in two neat braids by a kind nurse. Big brown eyes looked up at Eliana, bright with both fear and excitement. Mommy, Malia whispered, holding out her hand. Eliana rushed to her side and took it gently, brushing a kiss over her knuckles. Alex remained in the doorway, silent but watchful. Malia's gaze flicked toward him. Is it today? She asked, her voice small. Yes, baby, Eliana said, her throat thick. Today. Will you stay? Malia asked, looking up at Alex with that unguarded curiosity children have. Alex cleared his throat, and for a moment, something almost pained flickered in his expression. If you want me to, he said finally. Malia nodded solemnly. Okay. The doctor appeared at the door then, clipboard in hand. It's time, he said gently. Eliana bent over her daughter, pressing a trembling kiss to her forehead. I love you so much, she whispered, fighting tears. I love you, too, Mommy, Malia murmured, her little hands squeezing tight. They watched as the nurse gently lifted Malia's bed rails and began to wheel her down the hall toward the operating room. Eliana's vision blurred as she followed alongside, her fingers brushing Malia's until the very last moment when she had to let go. When the doors closed between them, Eliana pressed her palms to the glass and bowed her head. Alex stepped up behind her, resting a steadying hand on her back. She's in good hands, he said quietly. Eliana swallowed hard, her voice ragged. I hope so. As they sat in the quiet waiting room, the sterile scent of antiseptic hanging heavy in the air, Alex leaned back in his chair and studied Eliana, his dark eyes unreadable. Well, he said finally, breaking the silence. You only have 2 days left in this arrangement. Eliana swallowed, her gaze dropping to the floor. I know. Alex reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded check. Without a word, he held it out to her. Eliana stared at it, then reached for it with trembling fingers. When she unfolded it, her breath caught. $3 million, the remaining money he'd promised her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. Alex gave a single nod, his expression impassive. The hours dragged by. They sat side by side in the waiting room, the weight of exhaustion and anxiety pressing heavily around them. Neither spoke much. They were simply present. Eliana stared at the clock on the wall, her mind replaying every moment of the past week. Alex sat beside her, legs crossed, his fingers occasionally drumming on the armrest as he stared off into the distance, lost in his own thoughts. Late that night, the doors to the operating room swung open. Dr. Ellis emerged, his surgical mask hanging loosely around his neck, deep lines etched across his tired face. Eliana shot to her feet, so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Alex rose beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, though he didn't touch her yet. "The surgery was a success," Dr. Ellis said, a weary but genuine smile breaking across his face. "Malia did beautifully. She's stable and in recovery. You can see her soon." A choked sob tore from Eliana's throat as tears flooded her eyes. "Oh my God, thank you. Thank you," she cried, pressing both hands over her mouth. Before she realized what she was doing, she turned and threw her arms around Alex, burying her face against his chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks as her body shook with relief. For a moment, Alex stood frozen, his arms hovering uncertainly in the air. Then slowly, almost hesitantly, he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer. "It's okay," he murmured softly, one hand sliding into her hair. "She's going to be okay." Eliana sobbed harder, gripping the front of his suit as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. And for the first time, Alex held her, not as a man claiming a debt, but simply as someone who didn't want to let her fall. Later that night, Alex and Eliana stood together outside the glass wall of the ICU, peering in at Malia. She lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by softly beeping monitors, her small chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. The sedatives kept her in a deep sleep, her eyelids barely flickering. Eliana pressed her fingertips gently to the glass, a bittersweet smile trembling on her lips. "She's safe now," she murmured, her voice raw with relief. Alex nodded silently beside her, his hands buried in the pockets of his tailored slacks. By the time they returned to the penthouse, exhaustion clung to them like a second skin. Neither spoke a word as they entered the silent, gleaming space. Alex paused in the foyer, glancing toward Eliana as if he wanted to say something. But instead he turned and headed down the hallway to his study, closing the door quietly behind him. Eliana stood there for a moment, staring after him, then exhaled shakily and made her way to the bedroom. She slipped under the cool sheets and lay staring at the ceiling, the weight of the past week pressing heavily on her chest. Despite her fatigue, sleep eventually claimed her, pulling her into a deep, dreamless slumber. It was well past midnight when Alex finally left his study. He moved through the dim penthouse with slow steps, the city's lights casting silver-blue shadows across the marble floors. In the bedroom, he paused at the doorway, his dark eyes softening as he saw Eliana sleeping peacefully. Her hair spilled across the pillow, her features relaxed in the pale glow of the city lights filtering through the glass walls. Alex stepped closer, lowering himself onto the edge of the bed. For a long moment, he simply watched her breathe, his expression caught somewhere between longing and regret. Leaning forward, he brushed a stray lock of hair from her face and whispered so quietly that only the darkness heard him, "You deserve someone who can love you the right way." Then he lay down beside her, careful not to wake her, staring up at the ceiling as his own demons kept him company in the silence. The next few days passed in a blur between follow-up visits to the hospital, paperwork, and quiet moments in the penthouse. Time seemed both impossibly fast and painfully slow for Eliana. The morning she was to leave Alex's penthouse, sunlight spilled softly across the sleek furniture and marble floors. Alex had already gone. He sat in his office high above the city, the glass wall behind his desk framing the sprawling metropolis alive with honking horns, flashing billboards, and the endless flow of people. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window, lost in thought. Eliana, Malia, are you a nice person? Malia's innocent question echoed in his mind, rolling through him with an unexpected ache. He found himself smiling faintly, shaking his head. He had always made it clear he didn't want commitment, a wife or children. Those were chains, he told himself, a liability. But now he wasn't sure. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Eliana stirred awake in the vast, silent bedroom. She sat up slowly, the weight of the past week pressing on her chest like a stone. For a long moment, she stared at the empty side of the bed where Alex had slept, her fingers brushing over the cool sheets. Then she exhaled shakily and began to gather her things. She moved quietly through the penthouse, her small bag clutched tightly in one hand. He left without even saying goodbye, she thought, her throat tightening. Am I foolish? Is there any woman who's given herself to a man over and over and didn't feel anything? She bit her lower lip to keep it from trembling. Slowly, she walked to the door, pausing one last time to look back at the place where her life had been turned upside down. Then she stepped out, closing the door behind her. She went straight to the hospital, her footsteps quickening as she reached Malia's room. Inside, her daughter sat propped up against her pillows, a little pale, but brighter each day. Malia's eyes lit up when she saw Eliana enter, but there was a searching look in them, too. He didn't come, Mommy, Malia said softly. Eliana's heart twisted. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, taking Malia's small hand. No, baby. He had to work today, Eliana said gently. Malia looked down at her fingers, then back up at her mother. Will you tell him I missed him when you see him again? She asked, her voice quiet and hopeful. Eliana forced a smile, though her chest ached. Sure, baby, she said, brushing her daughter's cheek with trembling fingers. I'll tell him. The doctor entered Malia's hospital room, glancing over the chart in his hands. Eliana rose quickly from the chair beside her daughter's bed. Doctor, how soon can Malia go home? She asked, hope tightening her voice. Dr. Ellis smiled warmly. She's recovering quickly, Miss Dawson. If her vitals stay stable overnight, she can go home tomorrow. Eliana blinked back tears of relief. Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. Later that afternoon, Eliana sat in the small waiting area, her mind racing. She pulled out her new phone, the one Alex had given her, and scrolled through hotel listings. I can't take her back to that old apartment, she thought, picturing the narrow stairway and peeling paint. She deserves better, even if it's just a hotel for now. She booked a modest but comfortable hotel suite with an elevator, clean rooms, and space for Malia to recover safely. It wasn't the penthouse, but it would be enough. Meanwhile, that evening, Alex returned to the penthouse. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the city awash in neon lights and pulsing traffic below. He stepped through the front door, expecting the quiet, but still not prepared for how heavy the silence felt. He shrugged off his suit jacket and loosened his tie as he moved through the sleek, empty rooms. The soft hush of his footsteps echoed off marble floors and glass walls. He found himself standing in the doorway of the bedroom, staring at the neatly made bed. Eliana's things were gone. No soft blouse draped over the chair, No small purse on the dresser. No faint lingering trace of her floral scent. Alex exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees. The city lights cast shifting patterns across his face, highlighting the hard set of his jaw and the glint of something far more vulnerable in his eyes. For a long while he sat there in the stillness, his chest tight with a jumble of emotions he'd spent years trying to avoid. Hope, possibility, regret. I told myself I didn't want a wife or a family, he thought, staring at the city below. But what if I was wrong? The next day dawned bright and cool, sunlight streaming across the hospital corridors. Eliana stood beside Malia's bed as a nurse carefully removed the last monitoring wires and helped the little girl into a soft pink hoodie and leggings. "Mommy, are we really going home today?" "Yes, baby," Eliana said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're going home." Meanwhile, across the city, Alex sat in his office, one hand wrapped around his phone as he stared out over the gleaming skyline. "How is she, doctor?" Alex asked, his voice low and controlled. Dr. Ellis's voice came through the line, calm and reassuring. "We released her today, Mr. Peterson. The surgery went beautifully, and she's recovering well." Alex closed his eyes briefly, a small breath of relief escaping his chest. "Thank you," he said before ending the call. He sat there for a moment longer, the weight of silence pressing around him before he set the phone down gently on his polished desk. At the hotel, Eliana stood at the door, holding Malia's hand as they stepped into their modest suite. Sunlight spilled through the windows onto crisp white sheets and simple but welcoming furnishings. Eliana helped Malia onto the bed, arranging pillows around her and tucking her in carefully. "Mommy, can we stay here?" Malia asked suddenly, her eyes shining with hope. "Please." Eliana sat down beside her daughter, brushing a soft curl away from her forehead. "Just for a little while, baby," she said, her voice gentle but uncertain. "Until Mommy figures things out." Malia pouted, snuggling deeper into the covers. "I like it here. It's pretty, and there's an elevator, so I don't have to do stairs." Eliana laughed softly, though a hint of sadness lingered in her eyes. "I know, sweetheart. I like it here, too." She rose and crossed to the window, staring out at the busy city below. Her mind kept drifting back to the penthouse, to the man she hadn't heard from since he'd slipped out that last morning. "Don't be foolish," she scolded herself. "He gave you what you asked for. That's all." Yet, even as she told herself that, her heart refused to listen. Weeks later, life slowly began to take on a new shape for Eliana and Malia. With the money Alex had given her, Eliana purchased a beautiful 3-bedroom home on the outskirts of the city. It was nestled on a quiet street lined with tall trees and blooming flowers, far from the crowded sidewalks and constant noise of their old neighborhood. The air smelled fresh, and neighbors waved politely from manicured lawns as Eliana carried boxes into her new front door. Inside, sunlight spilled through wide windows onto gleaming hardwood floors. Malia skipped from room to room, squealing with delight. "Mommy, look. We have a backyard." Eliana smiled, though her chest ached with the bittersweet weight of how quickly everything had changed. That evening, as she unpacked a box of kitchen utensils, Eliana paused, staring into the cardboard depths. "I should call Sarah," she thought suddenly. "I want to tell her everything. How Malia is okay, how we have a house." But then her shoulders slumped. Her old phone, battered and cracked, had been left behind at the penthouse. All her contacts gone. A pang of loneliness tugged at her chest. Meanwhile, across the city, Alex sat alone in the shadowed penthouse. The vast rooms were immaculate, every surface gleaming under the city lights outside the glass walls. but they felt empty, hollow. He tried to work, pored over contracts, fielded calls with executives, signed deals worth millions, but none of it quieted the gnawing restlessness inside him. Late at night, he found himself staring into the darkness, haunted by memories. His mind flickered back to that first night with Eliana. The way her soft sounds had filled the quiet bedroom, the feel of her nails digging into his shoulders, how she'd wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him down into a hungry kiss that had made him forget who he was. He closed his eyes, exhaling a shaky breath. He missed her, and the truth he tried so hard to avoid was undeniable. Eliana Dawson had changed him. Days later, the early morning sun streamed into Eliana's new kitchen, catching motes of dust as they danced in the light. But Eliana barely noticed the golden glow. She sat slumped at the table, one hand pressed to her forehead as waves of nausea rolled through her stomach. Her skin felt clammy. Her eyelids drooped with a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. "I can't be," she whispered to herself, shaking her head as though trying to fling the thought away. But the suspicion refused to loosen its grip. Later that afternoon, after Malia settled in for a nap, Eliana grabbed her purse and hurried outside. She flagged down a taxi, climbed in, and gave the driver the address of the nearest pharmacy. As the car wound through quiet streets, Eliana stared out the window, her pulse thundering in her ears. Inside the bright fluorescent aisles of the pharmacy, she moved quickly, plucking a small pink and white box from the shelf. No, she grabbed another for good measure. 2 tests, just to be sure. At home, Eliana shut herself in the bathroom, her hands trembling as she tore open the first package. Moments later, she sat on the closed toilet lid, gripping the plastic stick so hard her knuckles were white. When she dared to look, her eyes widened, her heart seeming to stop in her chest. 2 bright red lines. "No, no, no," she repeated, shaking her head in disbelief. She ripped open the second package and hurried through the process again, praying the first result had been a mistake. But when she checked the second test, her breath left her in a strangled gasp. 2 red lines stared back at her. She pressed both tests onto the bathroom counter and backed away as if they might burn her fingers. "I'm pregnant." Tears welled in her eyes as she wrapped her arms around her middle, sinking to the cool tile floor. Everything spun around her. Malia, the house, her future, and Alex. What am I going to do? She thought, her mind spiraling into panic. To be continued.